Baba mwana wina zina rache munzi wa Nkumbula. Ananena zuka 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 Afrika zuka. Ananena zuka zuka Afrika zuka.
We thank you, oh God, for bringing us to this minute. That in your own good time, you remind us of the things we ought to have done a long time ago. Like our dear father, Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula. Help us, Lord, to honor our heroes. Help us to remember, oh God, with deep gratitude, the people that have taught us who we are, and help us to teach our children. We thank you in all things, little, big, and small. We thank you for the big things you have done for us in this nation, oh God, and we thank you for our peace. In Jesus' name we pray all these things. Amen.
The President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema. The Honorable Justice, Dr. Mwaanga State Council, the Chief Justice of Zambia. Honorable Mulambo Haimbe MP, Minister of Justice. Invited Cabinet Ministers. The Provincial Minister for Lusaka Province, Honorable Shio Muliata MP. The Secretary to the Cabinet, Mr. Patrick K. Kambwa. Your Worship, the Mayor of the City of Lusaka, Ms. Chilando Chitangala. The Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation Board of Directors and Senior Management Officials and members of the Nkumbula family. Members of the UPND Alliance Council of Presidents, members of the United Party for National Development National Management Committee, members of Parliament, senior government officials, permanent secretaries, members of the Diplomatic Corps, the District Commissioner for Lusaka, Mrs. Rose K. Zulu, distinguished invited guests, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you all. All right, good to see all of you here at the inaugural launch and public lecture for the Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation. And Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula, they called him the old lion. And all sorts of images filled my mind. I imagined him with a mane and this big roaring voice, and it scared me every time I heard that name. Then I saw his picture, I said, he's a man. Well, we are here to celebrate that man, because indeed he was a man in so many ways, not only to his family, but indeed to the entire country, and the history is there for all of us to read and indeed to appreciate and be grateful for. So we're thankful to the Foundation for this initiative, this inaugural launch and the public lecture, and of course the establishment of the Foundation. My name is Patti Mogando, and I'm honored to be Master of Ceremonies for this event here. The first thing that we're going to do is listen to a public lecture. This lecture will be delivered by the Honorable Justice, Dr. Mwaanga State Council, the Chief Justice of Zambia. Let's put our hands together for the Chief Justice, Honorable Justice, Dr. Mwaanga State Council, as he comes to deliver the first public lecture in honor of the old lion, Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula.
The occasion also marks the launch of the Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation. I understand that the foundation and the public lectures have been instituted to honor the memory of the distinguished freedom fighter, astute educator, skillful organizer, national unifier, political problem solver, and icon nationalist, described by some as the old lion of Zambia. He lived between 15 January 1916 and 8 October 1983. At age 67, when he died, he was perhaps not that old after all, especially in the respectful view of those whose ages are in the neighborhood of 67 or have long surpassed it. But he was nearly 50 years old when I was born, which is a whole lifetime, I must say, for many people in Zambia at the time, when life expectancy in this part of the world stood at 49.8 years. So to stress the point, at the time of his death, I was still a teenager. And for the benefit of those of our colleagues in the audience who place a high premium on precision, let me state from the outset that I never had the privilege of speaking to Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula myself, nor did I have the pleasure of meeting him in person. Little wonder then that the first reaction upon receipt of the invitation from the board of the foundation to give this lecture was to question my own capacity to undertake successfully such a humongous task, granted the stature of the man and the fact that he and I were generations apart. And I'm sure that you will agree that merely attempting, as I'm doing, to exalt this dogmatic legendary who wielded a reputation of political dynamism in our country's independence struggle is indeed daunting. I am, however, considerably encouraged by the African customary wisdom, which suggests that the size of the animal does not matter. What matters is the taste of its soup. When I think of Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula and his contribution to the liberation struggle of our country, I think of the values of a leader, especially a good one. I think of the values of a good leader must have, namely vision, conviction, integrity, sincerity, loyalty, tolerance, accommodation, and humility. These are values that are discernible from one's actions and not from one's words. As I hope to demonstrate in this lecture, Nkumbula held with remarkable consistency a high ethical standard of behaving in line with these values. One thing that remains unadulterated is that he was relentless in his courage and conviction to give trouble to those who caused trouble for the African race in Northern Rhodesia. He was, I surmise, driven by some of the noblest principles and character traits of a good political leader. I also think he was a principled man, inventive, forward-looking, and pragmatic. From what my reading of history reveals, he was quite a great strategist too, and that made him one of the most influential politicians in our history as a country, influential in a positive sense. He saved this country through political activism from his youthful days in the 1940s, with a great sense of duty, patriotism, and utmost truthfulness. His unshakable belief in an independent and democratic Zambia, as well as his dogged determination to help build a genuine multi-ethnic and multiracial democracy in Zambia, gave him the moral authority to embrace national reconciliation, which enabled Zambia to turn its back on the senseless horrors and cruelties of political violence that gripped the nation in the years immediately following the formation of the United National Independence Party unit. He was indeed the outstanding statesman of Zambia's history, who laid a foundation of respect for human rights and individual liberties, the rule of law, and the love of nation above self. His over 3 decades in struggle for equity, freedom, justice, and progress made him one of the greatest heroes of Northern Rhodesian liberation movement and a unifying force when the newly independent nation appeared fragmented and weak. He was indeed a symbol of bravery, faith, and promise. But Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula was loved, admired, and respected, but was never hero worshipped by the greatest number. He is, in a sense, one of the unsung heroes of Zambia's liberation movement. His contribution to nationalism and the independence of Zambia has largely been overshadowed by what could well have been a calculated focus on the populism of other freedom fighters of the time, thanks to the concerted and well-orchestrated effort by some of his opponents to caricature him as an arrogant person, unorthodox, a terrorist, a tribalist, a troublemaker, a rogue element who rejoiced in riotous living involving wine, women, and song. This projection of the man, together with the fact that he never became the president of Zambia, like his compatriot, his close compatriot, Kenneth Kaunda, had led over the years to his incalculable contribution to Zambia's freedom fight being sidelined or even forgotten in mainstream political discourse. The situation of the seeming neglect or misrepresentation of Nkumbula's real contribution to the nationalist movement and the quest for independence of Northern Rhodesia, as well as to the consolidation of nationhood after independence, is unsurprising. After all, history, as we well know it, is replete with examples of leaders whose ideas, policies, and programs were, at the time they were being conceived or implemented, criticized by people who did not look into the future and yet were later vindicated. Born in Mala village, Mwaanga district in Southern Province, this iconic nationalist became part of the movement for the independence of Northern Rhodesia in his 20s. I think he was 24 when he started it all. He distinguished himself as a relentless fighter for Northern Rhodesia's liberation. He had the benefit of education from Methodist schools, attaining in 1936 his Standard 6 at Kafue Training Institute, which had been, by the way, rechristened Kafue Boys Secondary School by the time I attended the same institution as a Form 1 pupil some 42 years later. He used his privileged position and became an educationist in 1938, teaching in Mwaanga district for a while before he was posted to Mufurila Central School as head teacher. By the time he was moved to Sakile Elementary School in Kitwe, where he continued to serve as headmaster between 1942 and 1943, he had become not only a champion of the cause for better African education in general, but also a passionate advocate for the education of the girl child in particular. Occasionally, he wrote very critical papers about the colonial education's neglect of the girl child and the importance of female education, which the colonial administration found rather offensive. He in fact campaigned door to door for parents to send their children to school. He understood that the real safeguard of the independence and democracy that Africans of Northern Rhodesia were clamoring for is education. It was not lost on him that quality education is the currency for personal progress, democracy, and development in any country. So the real turning point in Nkumbula's political fortunes was in 1942, when he became the founding secretary of the African Teachers Association of the Copperbelt. This association, in its own ways, insisted on an independent Zambia, resisting the colonial government of the time and opposing the threatened imposition of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. And through all his political activism, especially under the association, Nkumbula showed that he was a tenacious servant leader. Sir Roy Welensky and his kind fervently advocated the establishment of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, claiming that this was necessary to enhance a partnership between the white settlers and the black indigenous people of the two Rhodesias and Nyasaland. But Nkumbula well understood the consequences that were to come with the dominion status of being in a federation. His political activism saw him vigorously lead a vicious crusade against the proposed federation. In opposing the federation, Nkumbula at one of the meetings suggested the massacre of white settlers as a way of making them understand the deep revulsion with which the notion of the federation resonated in the minds of the black people of Northern Rhodesia. In reaction, the colonial administration labeled him a troublemaker and the most dangerous man alive in Northern Rhodesia. And in a move that was seen as both necessary to protect him as well as good riddance of a man who was proving to be a thorn in the flesh of the colonial administration of Northern Rhodesia, Sir Stewart Gore Brown, who was sympathetic to the cause of black people of Northern Rhodesia, helped secure a scholarship for Nkumbula in 1946 for him to go and study at Makerere University, where he discovered, rather surprisingly, that the breed of the white people that were in Uganda at the time was more affable and accommodating than the one he had left in Northern Rhodesia. So he later went to the University of London on a British Council scholarship, and there he not only obtained a diploma in education, but came under the influence of Pan-Africanism, in which a colleague was involved, and that colleague of his was Hastings Kamuzu Banda, who was later to become president of independent Malawi. Now, upon his return from London, Nkumbula established himself as a natural leader, and in 1951, he became the second president of the Northern Rhodesian African Congress, succeeding
Godwin Mbikisita Leonica, who later became the Litunga of Paroslack. So the Northern Rhodesia African Congress proved to be a very formidable political organization that championed African interests, opposed colonial subjugation of the indigenous people of Northern Rhodesia, and campaigned for self-rule. The name of the party changed later on from Northern Rhodesia African Congress to African National Congress. And at that time, when it changed, Kenneth Kaunda was the Secretary General, and this was in 1953. So, had Nkumbula's opposition to the Federation relented by the time he came back from the UK? Not one bit. If anything, his tenacity had become even more profound. It was heightened by his interaction with like-minded leaders like Hastings Kamuzu Banda while he was in London. He thus continued in his opposition to white rule, being, in the view of the colonial administration, a bad egg in a general way. For example, he confronted the color bar in ways that were most disagreeable to the colonial government. Burned government white papers, wrote offensive articles, etc. He and Kenneth Kaunda led the Lusaka boycott of butcheries, which was moderately successful. And in 1955, Nkumbula and Kaunda were sent to jail for 2 months for, among other things, being in possession of and distributing seditious literature. It was that imprisonment that seemed to have somewhat diminished the political fortunes of the old liar. Upon his release from court, he preferred passive resistance to violent confrontation and agitation. There was a general feeling that jail time could have mellowed Nkumbula significantly. He was henceforth viewed as less militant, less radical, in short, weak and more inclined to the colonial government. Besides being viewed as a moderate, he was also seen as autocratic, craving of a good life, etc. He was isolated slowly by those who advocated militancy and violence against the colonial administration. He lost a huge following of ordinary members and leaders alike, including Kenneth Kaunda. So the nationalist movement that he was spearheading split in 1958. A breakaway party from the ANC, the Zambia African National Congress, ZANC, was formed with Kaunda as its president. So the party was not long thereafter banned and Kaunda sent to jail. So the United National Independence Party unit was formed in 1959 while Kaunda was in prison. Matthias Mainza Chona headed UNIP at the time it was formed. Upon his release from jail, Kaunda took over the leadership of UNIP as president. Now Nkumbula and his ANC soldiered on despite the setback of resignations and isolation. During the 1959 elections, he was elected to the Legislative Council, but faced a trying time the next years when he was charged with dangerous driving, convicted and sentenced to a year in prison. He lost his appeal. He nonetheless continued to be a factor in the liberation struggle, albeit with diminished influence. Although he was still widely acknowledged for his leading role as the father of African nationalism in northern Rhodesia. His reputation at that stage has severely suffered as compared with that of his rival, Kenneth Kaunda. Now, although the ANC had far less votes compared to UNIP and the white-dominated United Federal Party, UFP, it had the trump card in that it had sufficient to contribute to the formation of the next government. Nkumbula held talks with both UNIP and the UFP about forming a coalition government. He gave a condition to each, and this is very important. To UNIP, he asked it to condemn communism. He asked UNIP to condemn communism as a condition and to denounce the use of violence and intimidation. To the UFP, he demanded the end of the notion of the political federation. These, you will agree, were selfless conditions that were designed to further what Nkumbula had stood for in his whole time as a freedom fighter. A lesser man would have been focused on what was in it for him as an individual. I give you my votes, what is there for me? But that's not what Nkumbula was demanding. He wanted something that would drive the country forward to the vision that he had from inception, thereby ushering in the first black government in the country's history, where he accepted to serve as Minister of African Education. Such was the selflessness of the leader, a man who lived for and lived to see a united Zambia, earning for himself in the process the national emblem of dignity and tolerance. In most African countries, as we know, the inclination by leaders is not to countenance the idea of being ousted out of power. In Africa, in the aftermath of the independence struggle, in many countries, insecurity had given rise to authoritarianism, and accordingly, the banning of opposition parties and the detention of opposition leaders had been perceived as preemptive steps. We in Northern Rhodesia were promised something different. Some 7 months before independence, in March of 1964, President Kenneth Kaunda had assured the nation that a one-party state in Zambia would only be introduced through the electoral process. 3 years later, in 1967, the president reiterated the same principle when addressing the annual conference of UNIP held at Mulungushi. He at that occasion summarized the government's position on the issue as follows. One, that his government was in favor of a one-party state. Two, that there was no intention to legislate against the opposition. Three, that by being honest in the cause of the common man, the party and its government would, through effective organization, paralyze and wipe out any opposition, thereby bringing about the birth of a one-party state. Four, that even when the eventuality came about, i.e. wiping out the opposition, government would still not legislate against the formation of opposition parties, because according to him, it might be bottling up the feelings of certain people, no matter how few. That was the promise that was made before independence. Now, at independence, at Zambia's independence in 1964, 3 parties, UNIP, ANC, and NPP, competed for power. And out of that contest, UNIP won. They had 56 elected members of parliament. ANC only obtained 8 seats, and NPP came out with 10 members elected on the reserved European roll. So when Zambia attained independence in 1964, Nkumbula's ANC became the official opposition party in Zambia's new parliament. So we were a multi-party democracy. Elections were held again in 1968, and the NPP by then had been dissolved. So the contest was really between UNIP and the ANC. And the results were that UNIP emerged with 81 elected members of parliament and ANC with 23 members. So in those elections, what was perhaps very telling was that Western Province, which was formerly a UNIP stronghold, had rejected almost all the candidates by UNIP. And then this sent some signal to President Kaunda. He noticed or realized that there was quite a lot of force in the opposition. The 1968 elections had also worked against government policy. The plan by the government of destroying the opposition through the ballot box. UNIP also suffered further setbacks in the 1970-71 when Simon Mwaanga and his followers left UNIP and formed the United Progressive Party. So the political climate, which resulted from the emergence of the UPP, United Progressive Party, on the political scene, was very tense, and it manifested itself in nationwide appeal, not only for the detention of its leaders, but also for the introduction of the one-party state. So in the wake of all these developments, there were demands everywhere for the country, from every part of the country, this was according to KK and UNIP. There was demand from everywhere around the country for the establishment of the one-party state. So the government abandoned this original idea, which was promised just before independence, on the introduction of the one-party state, and President Kaunda now insisted that government's decision to bring about the one-party state was going to be through legislation. We all know about the commission that was established to consider the desired change and what the terms of reference were. But when the commission was established, Nkumbula, who was a fierce critic of the one-party state, was not questioned. He took out an action against the government, challenging the legality of the state to set up a commission to gather views on the establishment of the one-party participatory democracy, as they called it. So he claimed that his fundamental rights were likely to be infringed by the actions that were taken by the state. The Court of Appeal rejected the petition on the basis that if government, and this was the Court of Appeal of those days, not the current Court of Appeal. It wasn't even the Constitutional Court, but listen to what they said. That if government first amended the Constitution in the appropriate manner, he would have no right to be infringed. You know, that as things stand, they can amend the Constitution, nothing would stop them. And but if they did amend it, then they will take away his rights, so he cannot talk about infringement of rights which have been. So it was not the Concord. Moreover, the courts, according to the holding of that particular court in the decision, that the courts have power to prevent or question, have no power rather, to prevent or question any bill before it becomes law, even if it aims at removing fundamental rights. A very bad decision if you ask me now. But anyway, it was the decision of the Court of Appeal, and Nkumbula, in his wisdom and as a person who respected the rule of law, accepted the decision and moved on. So this decision effectively slammed the door to multi-party democracy in Zambia for a while, at least until, as we know, in 1991. The appeal, of course, was unsuccessful. Now, on the 27th of June of 1973, the Choma Declaration was signed. And this was intended to forestall. Now we've moved away from all these intentions. It was intended to forestall the tension and the fighting between various parties. And this paved way to one-party state when the magnanimous Nkumbula accepted to merge with UNIP. And if that declaration had not been signed, divisions and violence that had existed amongst Zambia's political parties would have persisted. This, I think, is a very short history of Mwaanga Nkumbula and the liberation struggle of Zambia. So, what would we say the verdict is on Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula's leadership in the liberation struggle and the ideas of black consciousness? Undoubtedly, it is overwhelmingly positive in my humble view, and the lessons we learn from the numerous the lessons we learn are rather numerous, and we can discern them from the attributes, key of which are the following. One, Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula believed in education and progress. Throughout his professional career as a teacher, before he drifted into mainstream politics, Nkumbula valued education a great deal. He showed the nation that there can be no substitute for quality education, and he particularly advocated education of the girl child. Second, he was neither vindictive nor vengeful. In all his dealings, Nkumbula proved in a very profound way to be the go-to figure despite all the disappointments he faced. When his trusted lieutenants left his party to form the Zambia African National Congress, he remained steadfast and focused on the bigger picture, i.e., the attainment of majority rule. When Mahatma Gandhi said, quote, "The history of the world is full of men who rose to leadership by sheer force of self-confidence, bravery, and tenacity," Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula is a perfect example. And to adapt the phrase by Lord Denning, politics and governance, like law, is for bold souls, not timorous ones. If Nkumbula had adopted a vengeful attitude, he would have supported rather the bill in the Legislative Council that was targeting to destroy UNIP. Why? Because UNIP, after all, was composed of his former supporters come political foes. He did not take to heart the deep differences that had ensued between him and his former Secretary General, Kenneth Kaunda. Nkumbula cooperated with Kaunda in the interests of the nation. He formed a coalition, as I said earlier, when the unity of the nation mattered. He signed the Choma Declaration, all in an effort to bring about peace. In this sense, he was a true patriot and a perfect peace builder. 3, He was a Democrat. Nkumbula valued political competition. In his criticism of the idea of a one-party state in parliament, he pointed out that it would limit civil liberties and concentrate power in the hands of one man. He took the matter to the matter of the introduction of the one-party state to court, as I have said already, though he was unsuccessful. And following the Choma Declaration of 1973, he reluctantly joined UNIP and served as a member of parliament from 1973 to 1983. However, in 1978, with former Vice President Simon Mwaanga being a true Democrat that he was, he melodramatically announced that he would challenge Kaunda for the leadership of UNIP and the right to contest the 1978 presidential elections. You know what UNIP did? UNIP very quickly moved to change the party constitution, barring those people who had not been members for more than 5 years. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? You see, when we say history teaches us what the future is and what the current situation is and what the future is. So UNIP moved to amend the constitution and barred those people who had not been members for more than 5 years, which disqualified automatically Simon Mwaanga. As for Nkumbula, he faced a very hostile crowd at Mulungushi Rock of Authority in Kabu, which frustrated his supporters, making him unable to raise the required number of supporters from the 9 provinces. Familiar again, not so. So both these tactics are not unfamiliar in today's politics. So being respecters of the rule of law, Nkumbula and Kapwepo challenged their disqualifications to contest elections in the High Court, and when they were unsuccessful, they petitioned the Supreme Court. To this day, the case brought by Nkumbula and Kapwepo against UNIP remains significant in Zambia's jurisprudence. So Nkumbula readily accepted differences in opinion with others and advocated peaceful coexistence. He opposed the introduction of the one-party state, as I said, because he believed that democracy entailed choices and that divergence in political opinion was good for governance, for human rights, and good for the development of the country. Fifthly, he believed in human rights and the rule of law. Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula believes that human rights must be upheld and protected at all times. His whole life in the nationalist movement was about the promotion of human rights to equality, non-discrimination, etc. He believed in people participating in the governance of their own country, which is why he adopted the approach of live and let live, rather than live and let die. When he perceived that his rights were in danger of being violated through the introduction of the one-party system, he went to court, as every good citizen who is aggrieved should do. The court ruled against him. He accepted the verdict of the court, even if he did not agree with it, as every good citizen should do. As a believer in the rule of law, Nkumbula did not take to disparaging the decision of the court when it ruled against him. He moved on, and through his signing of the Choma Declaration, he embraced the very idea that he had initially opposed. As a good leader, he understood that flexibility for the benefit of the greater good of the country was the way to go. But Nkumbula was also a good loser. In 1964, Nkumbula lost the elections and the opportunity to be Prime Minister of Zambia. He accepted the decision. He accepted the verdict of the voters and allowed the government of Kenneth Kaunda to deliver, in the real sense, by adopting such a stance, he was ultimately the triumphant statesman of Zambia. Nkumbula was also a visionary. He believed in free market and entrepreneurship, and brutally opposed unique state-driven economic development model, warning that it would impoverish the country. His fears came to pass as Zambia moved from being a prosperous country, which was the envy of its neighbors, to one where the shortage of essential commodities, debilitating debt burdens, and impoverishment came to be the order of the day. Nkumbula believed in a united Zambia. From his approach to issues, as I have indicated, and his readiness to offer concessions to accommodate the greater good rather than narrow personal or partisan interest, it is obvious that next to the liberation of Northern Rhodesia was the unification of Zambia on Nkumbula's agenda. He selflessly forewent much to ensure the unity of the country. If Nkumbula made unification of a divided Zambia a reality, and this is very important, if Mwaanga Nkumbula made the unification of a divided Zambia a reality, we can only pay tribute to him by making the unity of Zambia a reality. Such has been his greatness that even in his death, his great light will continue to shine bright, and we must let his example shine on to illuminate the entirety of Zambia as we strive to take to the doorsteps of every household the benefits of progress and freedom which he fought for. As I conclude, let me say something on the honoring of our fallen heroes, Mr. President. And I wish in this regard to start by commending the Nkumbula family for coming up with the idea of establishing a foundation to preserve the memory of Mwaanga Nkumbula. It is indeed a fitting tribute to a man who contributed immensely to our freedom and inspired generations of Zambians to fight for freedom, social justice, and democracy. Nkumbula sowed the seed that inspired pro-democracy advocates of the late 80s and early 90s that gave birth to the movement for multi-party democracy, MMD, and the Third Republic. It is important that we in this country learn to honor our heroes and preserve our memory in archives, libraries, and museums. Unfortunately, history has tended to glorify only those who get into political office, to the exclusion of those who contribute from opposition ranks or who, for that matter, fall out of favor. Zambia's political history has been rewritten and credit given to those who joined the struggle much later. Names such as those of Mwaanga Nkumbula, Mungoni Liso, Simon Mwansaka-Pwepwe, Nalumino Mundia, Kapasa Makasa, Munakayumbwa Sipalo, Mufaya Mumbuna, Malama Sokoni, and many others have all but been forgotten. Their exclusion has been largely because they disagreed with the then rulers and joined opposition ranks. This anomaly will need to be corrected. While we applaud the 6th President, Mr. Michael Sata, for honoring some of those heroes when he renamed Ndola Airport and Livingstone Airport after some of them, I would go so far as to suggest that the ANC office in Chilenje, Mapoloto, and houses where old Harry lived in Chilenje be declared national monuments in recognition of the contribution Mwaanga Nkumbula made to Zambia's freedom. Given his interest in education, It would not be a bad idea, Mr. President, to have a new public university named after Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula. I have no doubt in my mind that the Zambian people would warm up to such an idea in the same way that they did to a similar one for Kapasa Makasa University, the Paul Mushindo University. This could be the greatest tribute we fellow Zambians can pay to this great son of Africa. I thank you very much for listening.
You may take your seats, please. Thank you very much. Let me start by acknowledging all of us that are present tonight here at this important occasion. Chief Justice, representatives of the private sector that are present, shall I say invited guests, all of us who are invited to this function. Let me start by thanking the organizers, the board of directors, the advisory board, and the family, the Nkumbula family. I see Honorable Matongo there. It's good to see you here. To thank the organizers, the structures I've mentioned, the family that probably provided a seed for what we are doing here today, for extending your invitation to some of us, including myself, but more importantly, for asking me to perform this role that I'm performing tonight. Sometimes people like me or those who occupy these positions take it for granted that they will always be the guests of honor at any function they attend. That assumption is wrong. So thank you for making me the guest of honor. Most appreciated. Let me also really thank the family once more for allowing their father, grandfather, uncle, cousin, everything to be used in this country, in life and in death. I believe people understand what I mean. From what we've heard, what the Attorney General has said, clearly, Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula was used by this country to achieve certain purposes, many of which he agreed to. He shared that vision with the rest of the citizens. But he also was used as a country, by the country, to get the country to continue moving as a state and not to allow it to get divided along the way. I think that's a great feat. And we thank you, the family, for that, if you like, opportunity for us as citizens to use Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula in the many ways that we've listened to eloquently from the Chief Justice. And Chief Justice, thank you very much for that rundown. Makes my job easier, to be honest. I must also just thank again the family and the teams behind the creation of the foundation. It allows the country once more, yet again, to continue picking lessons from this giant. Giant among giants, I must say. I would not waste too much of your time tonight, but simply go straight to adding to, in my own way, in my own words, some of the attributes to add on to a list that the Chief Justice has ably articulated of Mwaanga and Nkumbula, and maybe pick some context to some of them as lessons for all of us that are still alive and are energetic and indeed have been privileged to perform national duties in one way or another. And I must say, including those in the private sector, private business. Nkumbula was strong, very strong. Went through detentions, as you have heard. As a politician, many of us understand that. You have to be strong. When you are in those environments, 1.5 meters by probably 1 meter room, and that's all you have in life at that particular moment, you have to be strong. And you may have to sleep on the floor without a blanket. If you're not strong, you break down. And your mental state is the first one to break down. When that happens, the body simply follows, and you're gone, you're broken. When you come out, you'll never be the same. There is a lesson from Mwaanga and Nkumbula here. And it befits all of us seated here, because someday you may run away from public engagement, but on a mere suspicion, you may end up in detention. That is true. So we must all carry some level of strength. We also know that sometimes a traffic accident, or purported to be a traffic accident, can end up into being a serious, heinous crime in the minds of people. So we must be strong individuals, communities, even to deal with the issues that we are confronted with. I was in Eastern Province to attend the Nkumbula ceremony, and the Ngoni warriors were dancing in peace, and they were singing. So I like to learn every moment. Someone is talking, someone is doing something. So I was following the song in Ngoni. They believe it's a Zulu language, but it's nothing like that. It's a Nsenga language, which has just been adulterated since the Ngonis lost their language and they assumed the women's language. The women they married in Nsengas. Bit of adulteration. No offense to the Ngonis here. I love the Ngoni language, Zulu language. So, and they were saying, Mpezeni wavutika. Don't follow my exact words. HH mwavutika. Zintu zitatu zoipa. So they started saying, first, they said triple C. First they said, COVID. Second C, cholera. Third C, Chilala. Chilala is drought. So they were saying the leaders, traditional leaders, national leaders, all of us as a country, as a citizenry, we've been afflicted by 3 C's: COVID, cholera, and Chilala, drought. Even in those circumstances, the lesson we pick from Mwaanga's life is to remain strong as a people, as a nation, to be resolute that we can overcome. We learn lessons from good situations. We learn lessons from difficult or bad situations. I think here is the message. If we're strong, we're clear in our minds, difficult as it may be, whatever it is, we shall be okay. And I say to this nation, we shall overcome the 3 C's. we shall overcome the drought. And last night, we made an appeal for support. So we can do two things: provide food to the most vulnerable of our people out of climate change, drought, and number two, to increase our resilience as a nation going forward. So we can have food security, we can have energy security, and consequential components of security or stability, without which we have national insecurity. So Harry taught us to be strong. So I ask the country to be strong as we go through these challenges. What else would I want to illustrate? I want to illustrate certain aspects that have been ignored about Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula. Very briefly, I won't be as illustrative as my intellectual colleague, Chief Justice. Harry Mwaanga was a businessman. Harry Mwaanga was a businessman. Many may not know that in those early days, even after he didn't become president of this country, he continued to walk the path of what he believed in: enterprise. Enterprise, yes. Emerald mining. How many Zambians at that time understood that actually you can run an emerald mine? There he was. I don't think many of you are aware of that. You may correct me on the name. Ompi Honorable Nkumbula can correct. Kularu? Kularu, which was Nkumbula and Rao. I think he had a partner, an Indian partner called Rao, and he in Nkumbula, then the name was Nkuraru, Nkumbula and Rao. Very few Zambians ever understood that a stone, a green stone, could actually generate revenues, substantial revenues, to support many needs. And I said to Zambians, we can't share poverty. And I mean it. For many years in opposition, I was being misunderstood to be saying something else. But the simple message here is that Harry understood that country, its citizens, indigenous, needed to be entrepreneurs in order to contribute to the national economy. And I invite Zambians to learn from Harry Mwaanga on that aspect as well. Clean legal business is okay. What is not okay is illegality. Simple and clear. What else? Harry Mwaanga believed in growing the country's economy so you can fund education. I think Chief Justice touched the story of education, his passion for education, including for the girl child. For us as a country to support children in school, including those that are orphaned, single or double orphan, the economy has to be viable. The economy has to work for us to provide medicines for the sick, to pay retirement benefits, to look after the old, to look after the differently abled. We have to have a functioning economy. Clear message. And you may be wondering why the UPND government has focused on economic reconstruction. Because we share in Harry Mwanga's vision that we cannot run a country whose economy is deliric, because we will not support anybody. Even if we love the people so much, we will not be able to support them to meet their needs. Simple, straight. Why we debate things that are simple and straightforward, I have no understanding. But in this country, we have an appetite to debate everything, even straightforward things, like what I've just said. Good lesson. And we all know that the countries that took an approach to invest in revenue generating rather than consumption expenditure, they are now much better than us. You look at the size of the Kenyan economy. Look at how the Botswana economy is running. And at independence, our economy was the size similar to that of Malaysia, similar to that of South Korea. Because Harry believed in the things I'm just illustrating now, and we went in a different direction. Today we have a small economy, and South Korea's economy is basically first world. That's the difference. A friend of mine wrote a book. I assisted him to do that, small assistance. And he argues his point in that book. I won't mention the book because it may start another debate. And he says what a country's economy and its people becomes is largely anchored on the leadership and the policy choices that those leaders make. Simple. I think we learned that from Harry at that early stage. What else do I want to isolate? I want to isolate the fact that Harry was a strong fundraiser for the struggle. Natural, isn't it? Since he himself was enterprising. I know that most people are not aware that he took a political home, you can argue about it, called Mwaanga. Happens to be my village. And used that to anchor the fundraising for the independence struggle. And they would secretly gather with his colleagues, Kenneth Kaunda as the secretary, Vakapolo, I don't know who was the treasurer then, Changuf. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's Changuf. Lewis Changuf. Who was it? Oh, was he the treasurer? Okay. So Kaunda, Nkumbula, then the president, Kapwepwe, treasurer, Kaunda, secretary general. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the theme is what I'm just about to say. And they would secretly go around the villages and ask villagers to contribute anything, even a chicken, one, for the struggle. And they chose a location in Mwaanga called Samria Momba. That's where they used to meet secretly, purporting that there was a ceremony taking place there. And then the donations would flow and go to the national struggle. Big lesson for us all. Everybody can contribute to advancement of the country in some way or another. It cannot be left to a few people only. It's a national agenda. Very important. I thought I should raise that issue as well. But funds, resources came from across the country. I've only cited one. Again, I don't want to be misunderstood. I've just cited one. The stories are still there in the surrounding areas, how they moved the cattle in the night, and then those who collected them to go and sell to raise money also moved in certain ways to conceal that activity from the colonial masters, who, if they knew, obviously they would stop it. And I would like to say that I'm very pleased that Samria Momba is now Chief Justice, a national heritage site. That decision has been made. I also want to pick, and I'll be done shortly, one trait of Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula and his colleagues, because today we are here for Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula. So everything we say is around him. It's not segregation in the typical Zambian sense. There's no segregation. Today we are here for Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula. Tomorrow will be another function about someone else, and we'll be talking things around that individual. Harry was, if I may say, kind. I don't want an argument with Honorable Ompi Nkumbula and Robert here. From this angle, because Harry was entrepreneurial early on, he was able to have 1 or 2 houses more than his colleagues who were in the freedom struggle. And when there was need, he availed his facilities to accommodate some of his colleagues. That's a fact. I will not mention names. Some benefited from that kindness to house them when they were either pushed out of where they were by the colonialists or later on by their own government. It's a fact. Harry was there to assist. You can check the history. So we must learn to give. When you are able to, give to those that are less able. I have a basic belief myself. If God gave you something extra, there's a reason he chose you. And he expects you to help someone who is less able than yourself. If he didn't, you didn't, he may take it away from you anyway, because all we have is his. We are just custodians on his behalf. Big lesson to the people of Zambia. But remember, I said we can't share poverty, so we have to work hard. So that's another attribute I want to pick of Harry. Hard work. We may say many things, but the art of hard work. Not just work, but hard work. We want this country to work hard. In church, in Dola on Sunday, I was attending church, Catholic church, and in there Bishop Piri and I shared some of the things that we thought were important for the country. I'll raise another. For now, it was an issue of hard work. That over years, the country began to believe, its citizens began to believe that you can get better by sitting down, by not working. You can be successful by sitting down. All you need to do is to queue. And I said, I don't know which philanthropist would giving handouts to a long queue of people who don't work hard. They just stand in a queue and some gifts are flowing. We must work hard as a country if we want to be successful. Consistently working hard, not start-stop. It's ordinary. And I want to agree with Chief Justice. I'm not sure why, Bob, you called your father-in-law and others old Harry, old lion. At 67, he was still a very strong younger man. So really, I think that connotation of old lion, I hope someone can challenge it in a different way, not in a confrontational way, but in a different way. So I do believe he died early. 67 is early. But that's not the point I'm making. I'm making the point of hard work. And we as a nation, 20 million plus of us, must pick that qualitative aspect of who he was. Let me pick another. Unity. Chief Justice touched it. Really, if you look at what Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula was able to do, even when he felt stronger, he felt disadvantaged, he still did the right thing for the unity of this country. 1962, if he didn't have, if you like, credentials of a unifier, he could have sided with the Europeans. And this professor seated here, Dr. Professor, I was watching one of your television programs, and you articulated this point. You may want to stand up so people know who I'm talking. You could face the other way. We better clap for him. I'm serious. You may take your seat. Appeal, is it John? The name? Chiputa, exactly. Dr. Chiputa. Am I right? Thank you. From Mwanza? You're no longer there. Because I used to see you when I was a student there. You may take a seat. He was on television arguing around this issue about the quality of the leaders of the time. I do believe you remember that interview very well. And he argued around what could have happened in 1962 when it was a three-way split. Not to worry too much about who got how many seats, but it was a three-way split. And if Harry wanted, he would have gone to bed with the Europeans. And we wouldn't be sitting the way we are seated in this way. He chose to go to the very group that broke away from him for the sake of national unity. That's what you were saying. That I do watch these things, television programs, even social media. I see what the young people say every day, and so many hours. I call it TikTok, 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 all the time. I'm less awake. So thank you for the historical perspective you've been giving. Not once. I've watched you a number of times. Dr. Chiputa. National unit. Unit of purpose. Very important. Thank you to that generation of the Kaundas, the Kapwepwes, the Nkumbulas, the Lanuminomundias, the Kamangas, the Grey Zulus. We who are now in these positions should learn a lot from that generation. I could say more, but I believe you have taken in a lot this evening. But let me just touch one little thing. When you elected us into public office, we, after elections, many may have not paid attention, because for the homes, the barriers of the freedom fighters, which are located in Lusaka, are easy to access. But my first trip ever outside to visit a location out of Lusaka after you elected us, thank you for your decision, all of you. Democracy is about majorities. So you are all taken in, even those who may have not voted for us, you voted for us, because the majority did that. Thank you for that. It's a light moment. I consciously, deliberately, intentionally took a visit to Chinsali to go and say thank you on behalf of that generation for the struggle, for what they endured to allow fellows like us to take public office. So I say representing all of them, including those who are still alive. Some of you seated here. I went to Chinsali, to the Kapwepwe home. And where is the daughter? You may take your seat. Thank you. I asked them to allow me to visit Simon Mwansa Kapwepwe's home and gravesite. They were gracious. It was my way of saying thank you on behalf of the living generation to what those did. I said for the graves outside of Lusaka, because the Lusaka one we were already going in and out all the time. I've been to the Kaunda home several times. The next stop, and thank you for looking after us. And I must say I was very embarrassed because Chinsali turned out. Chinsali turned out. The next home I went to was to Mala. Mala Zuma, Wata Zuma, Waria Mankoman. To go and pay homage to the village home, like I did with the Kapwepwes of the Nkumbula, Harimanga Nkumbula, the one we're here for tonight. Sending a similar message. And thank you. Bob, you were there? I think she was in America. She was in America. Similar message to say thank you to that generation. And what am I saying? We who are now in these roles, for now, we should appreciate the work that was done by those that came before us. We climbed on their shoulders. And we must conduct ourselves properly, responsibly, honestly, including not taking what is not ours. What belongs to people, and we are privileged to serve in these offices, we should expand it, not diminish it. Back to the Nkumbula issue. Grow this economy, Mr. Kawai. Investments. Not create a debt mountain, because it consumes the whole economy. Not luxury. I'm serious. Consumption expenditure destroys an economy. Investment expenditure, thank you, Dr. Jacob Mwaanga, for being here, builds the economy. When I was a student at Unza, Dr. Mwaanga was Vice Chancellor. We learned a lot from him, and we're privileged to have him alive today. He ran the Bank of Zambia properly. So we must run the institutions that we are asked for to run by the people of Zambia. They're not ours. I'm looking at my colleagues in cabinet there. We must remind ourselves that we are privileged, we are lucky to have these roles that these men fought for and paid dearly. Had their fingers chopped. I'm just using that as an analog. Had their fingers chopped to allow us to be here today. So why would we destroy national unity? Why would anyone even talk about destroying the country's national unity? One Zambia, one nation. Let me teach you something else beyond KK. And I want to embarrass her. In this office I occupy, I look at all of these people we're mentioning, all of them, BJs, others. What can we learn from them? And one of the things we learned from KK is to keep our country together. We may have not agreed how he did what he did, one-party state. I definitely don't agree with one-party state. But the motive was to keep the country together. So I learn a lot, remind myself, I tell my wife, how am I doing? Who should I reach out to? I'm not joking, serious. We have a duty to keep our country united, no matter the difficulties. If we are not able to do that, I think we shouldn't be in the offices we occupy. I'm daring enough to say that. If we can work hard to take out the debt mountain, something I call the mission impossible. Very difficult transaction. I'm a transactions man myself, but this was the most complicated transaction. What drove us was to think about, if we did not achieve debt restructuring, what would the country be? What will we be handing over when our time to hand over comes? So that's our way of behaving like KK, behaving like Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula, behaving like Kapwepwe, the families that are represented here. Let me just indicate here that thank you to the family once more. and to the structures that you've created. I've found the point I want to make, to create this foundation. If donations are welcome towards the foundation, if donations are welcome, I want to encourage us in this room to make donations towards the Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation. I put up my hand that I'm ready for my contribution towards Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation, so we can allow those coming behind us, younger people, to pick these lessons which the Chief Justice articulated, which I've added on or angled in my own way, and all of those brought together because it's necessary. So I encourage people outside of this room to do the same, and globally to do the same. And for other foundations that are well-meaning, that have this national appeal, may the legacy of Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula live on forever. May God bless the Nkumbula family and associates, the whole heritage. May God bless us all. May God bless our country, Zambia. I thank you for your kind attention.
Your appreciation is appreciated, Mr. President. And now there is one thing that we'd like for you to do, sir. We have I won't say what it is, but it needs to be unveiled. There's a ribbon that needs to be cut, and we'd like to invite you together with Mwaanga again to cut the ribbon. We have it to come forward at this moment. Dr. Zumatan.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Chief Justice, Dr. Mwaanga, the Council, Honorable Ministers, Honorable Deputy Chief Justice, distinguished Vice President, on behalf of the board, may I take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us today for the launch of the Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation. We are greatly honored, Mr. President. With your presence, we know that you are a very busy man, and it's really gratifying that you found time to come and grace this occasion. May I also thank Honorable Chief Justice for a moving public lecture, which was very comprehensive and covered so many things. I'm delighted to see in this audience a number of people who lived through the times of Harry Nkumbula. I've heard the name of Honorable DJ mentioned, but there are many others. Honorable Botis Kapulu is here, and many others. After I mention you by name, I recognize that you are that continuity from the past. I'm also delighted that the children of some of our fallen fathers, heroes, are also included here. And those who knew something about Harry Nkumbula are here, maybe second, third generation. We are gathered here this evening to launch a foundation in honor of one of the icons of Zambia's independence struggle. We do so with a realization that he was not, is just one of the many who sacrificed their comforts for the betterment of our people. Use their resources. The president has actually discussed that several times during his speech about the entrepreneurship of Old Harry. Master ceremonies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we recognize that there are many unsung heroes and heroines of Zambia's independence struggle who have remained unrecognized and forgotten by history. Apart from Harry Nkumbula, we remember Godwin Musa. We remember Umiso Nabuyato, Mboni Diso, Muganga Spalo, Dauti Yamba, Simon Mwaanga Pwepwe, John Kisata, now Mwaanga, and many others. Zambia's political history cannot be complete without the name of Harry Nkumbula. However, it should be recognized that Zambia's political history has been written by those who assumed power at independence, who by design obliterated from historical memory any mention of their political opponents. Chief Justice actually discussed this. I'll elaborate on that. Especially when these were opponents, political opponents. I think in a not very distant past, our own president, President Chidema, was actually not in the public imagination in that it was not covered by our national media, the national broadcasters, as if it never existed. Simply because he was the leader of the opposition party. Those who opposed unit government and President Kaunda were largely omitted from the glorious history of our independence. Where they were mentioned at all, they were often in negative terms, as has been already pointed out by the Chief Justice. We recognize the fact that Harry Nkumbula was honored by the President Michael Sata and Simon Mwaanga by many airports in their honor. But we feel that was belated.
The point, I think, has already been made. I don't need to go over that. It is against this background that we have found it imperative to establish a foundation to correct the historical narrative of the nationalist and independence struggle by recognizing the contribution of our founding fathers, Sir Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula, and documenting their life and times for future generations. Other ceremonies. The Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation is a non-profit, non-partisan foundation established to promote human rights and democracy in honor of the memory of Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula, the second and longest president of Zambia's foremost political organization, the African National Congress. Our mission is to contribute to the making of a just society by mobilizing the legacy of Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula, providing access to information on his life and times, convening policy dialogues on critical social and carrying out policy-oriented research on the most pressing questions confronting our country, such as climate change, education, gender, economic development, and leadership development. Mr. President, Honorable Chief Justice, ladies and gentlemen, the main objectives of the foundation are the creation, establishment, and preservation of the memory of Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula through an archive or library of his life and times, his works, writings, and speeches, convening dialogues and discussions on the ideas and principles advocated by Harry Mwaanga Nkumbula around critical socio-economic issues, particularly issues of human rights, democracy, rule of law, and economic development. Furthering nationwide expanded civic and political history of Zambia, including promoting knowledge of the ANC and other political party histories, especially through the inclusion of such in history in educational curricula of our country. Provision of educational funds in furtherance of foundation's objectives, and in some cases providing support such as scholarships and social welfare to children in need, and support to vulnerable members of the community, including persons with disabilities. Working with similar organizations in providing support services to the needy to alleviate poverty and deprivation. Other ceremonies, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, this foundation that is being launched today will have a fundamental stake in the transformation of Zambia's education and social sector, and in the promotion of rights-related research and analysis inspired by the principles and values that Mr. Harry Nkumbula actually stood for, and to which dedicated his very long, his life, his political career. I think that we mentioned that he was in politics, or he led the ANC for 22 years. There are very few leaders that have led a political party for a very long time, and he is one of them. He did not only lead a political party during the initial struggle, but he led it as an opposition party for a long time. I think maybe UPND can also compete with being in opposition for a very long time, Mr. President. Diakoma Makola has described Harry Nkumbula as a father of Zambian nationalism and African liberalism. Nkumbula was a liberal who believed in the values of a competitive multi-party system and a free market economy. He launched a principled opposition to one-party state, both as an opposition leader and as a member of the National Independence Party. It was that tradition of opposition politics, which inspired the internal opposition to the one-party state by Zambian trade unions and, of course, some individuals within the unit itself, and led to the death of the movement for democracy, a point that the Chief Justice already talked about. Thus, we wish to add that it was not only MMD that was born out of the inspiration of Harry Nkumbula, but even the Patriotic Front and UPN. So the opposition tradition was set out by Harry Nkumbula. While remaining non-partisan, the Harry Nkumbula Foundation will be the custodian of the legacy of Harry Nkumbula, or Harry Nkumbula. We will stand with like-minded people, both in Zambia and abroad, in advocating social justice, fighting against poverty, inequality, unemployment, and social discrimination of all types. Mr. President, you asked the question whether the foundation will need donations. Without preempting my chairperson's remarks, I think we do. We will need donations. And we will appeal to men and women of goodwill to help us support, to come forward and support the foundation financially, materially, and intellectually. Because we will partner with the education institutions, research institutions, in furthering the cause that the foundation has set itself on. We are still in a formative stage. The foundation was registered early in the year, so it will need all the support in ensuring that we memorialize our national heroes, starting with Harry Nkumbula. The foundation will also study the histories of other foreign heroes, including Simon Takuleke and others. We just happen to use the name Harry Nkumbula. I wish to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
That was Dr. Neo Simotanyi, a member of the board of directors for the Harry Nkumbula Foundation, giving the launch statement of the foundation, the Harry Nkumbula Foundation. We thank you. Thank you, Dr. Simotanyi. The last item on our agenda this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is a vote of thanks, which will be delivered by Mrs. Ompi Nkumbula Libentho. So let's put our hands together for Mrs. Ompi Nkumbula Libentho.
Ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Good evening. I am Ompi Nkumbula Libentho, daughter of the late Harry Nkumbula. On behalf of my husband, Robert Bob Libentho, and the Nkumbula family, I wish to thank you all for attending this inaugural public lecture and launch of the Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation. We are indeed greatly honored and humbled by your presence and support. We have listened to 3 inspiring and thought-provoking speeches for which I am profoundly grateful. First, may I thank you, Your Excellency, our guest of honor, and Your Honor, the Chief Justice, for your presence and remarks. I'm especially grateful for your statements that my father was way ahead of his time in recognizing the importance of education, especially that of the girl child. Now, his first 2 children were girls. So, in deeds as well as words, you and your government are delivering for Zambia in precisely these areas in ways that, were he with us today, my father would have strongly approved. Secondly, may I thank you for flagging how my father sowed the seeds that inspired pro-democracy advocates of the late 1980s and early 1990s that gave birth to the movement for multi-party democracy and the Third Republic. I personally remember his frustration at the introduction of the one-party state in 1972 and 1973, which you spoke about. One of several versions of our national history cries out for correction. And then the third speaker, Dr. Simtani, thank you for your masterful explanation of the need for this foundation and for setting out its vision and mission, especially for flagging the need to correct the historical narrative of the independence struggle, not only as it concerns my father, but many others. I now wish to thank those who have supported this event financially and otherwise. The honorable ministers and government officials that have honored us with their presence. The Freedom Fighters Association for your presence and support. the event organizers, the board, and the advisory board of the Mwaanga Nkumbula Foundation, and the Taj Pamosi Hotel for making us welcome. I would like to take this opportunity, perhaps as a small example, why this foundation is needed, to share something which has long been close to my heart. I know the Chief Justice, you mentioned this, but I'll say it again. From 1950 to 1958, the ANC office in Chilenje, then known as Makoloto, was the center of African nationalist politics in then Northern Rhodesia. All the top leadership of the ANC, literally everybody, worked from there. In those days, if you wanted to build a house, a church, or a shop, you got a plot or piece of land from the council. Hence the word Makoloto. I don't know if it is still being used, but it was known as Makoloto. That office was built in about 1951 and it still stands. I have appealed on several occasions for it to be declared a national monument, and hope that can be among the worthy causes pursued by the newly launched foundation. I was glad to hear that Isam Jamomba is now a heritage site. Thank you for that. May I conclude by observing that the establishment of our foundation coincides with the 60th anniversary of our independence. I had the honor and privilege of being present at Independence Stadium alongside my late father when the Union Jack was lowered and the Zambian flag flew for the first time. What better time to re-examine our historical narratives? Once again, thank you all for being here this evening and helping us launch the foundation. We shall be counting on all of you, as His Excellency has said, for your support as we embark on this exciting journey. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paddy. Slowly.
Another big round of applause for Mrs. Ompi Nkumbula. So we will ask that you don't return to your seat immediately.